Hi everyone, I am Christine Gritmon and this is Let's Talk About Brand. I do this live show every Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time, and I'm broadcasting right now, or at least should be, on several different platforms. I am on Facebook, I am on Twitter, I am on LinkedIn, and I am on YouTube. So please let us know in the comments, first of all, if you're joining the show live or on the replay, and then secondly, what platform you are joining us on. I'm very excited about today's show. I'm excited about every week's show. Let's be real. This show is always about interviewing very smart people about specific topics of their expertise related to branding. And this week we're covering something that we haven't covered before, which is branding with sound. Those of you who participate in my Tuesday Twitter chat about brand, which is every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time, already have explored this topic a little bit this past week, where we talk about how sound can really play into a brand's overall image. And today we actually have someone who does that professionally, the wonderful fellow Hudson Valley resident, Jessica Gramuglia. I also wanted to, before we move on to the interview, I want to make sure that everyone knows, first of all, about that aforementioned Twitter chat about brand every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time on my Twitter profile, C Gritmon. And then I also want to make sure that everyone knows that we also have a wonderful Patreon community for the Chat About Brand and Let's Talk About Brand community. So thank you very much to my Patreon members. I'm working with them to help them develop their own personal brands as well, along with each week's lessons. All right, time to bring on our guest. Hello, Jessica.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. This has been a crazy week. I started my week at Disney World, and I got back and launched right into a ton of work yesterday. And now I got this, and then I kind of get to coast, which is lovely.
Good.
So you and I met at a Hudson Valley Women in Business networking event right here in New York, and I would love to just hear a little bit about your journey and specifically how you came to do what you do, because it's not a very common field to be
Yes.
in.
Yeah, so my job is technically called music supervision. I'm a music supervisor. I studied this in college. My degree is in music industry. But oddly enough, the one class I did not take was music supervision in school. But I started off in video production, audio production, and editing because I wanted to be the one to choose music to put to picture. Because when I listen to music, I see things in my head, and it kind of just paired naturally with where I went in my life and my career. I can't run away from it even if I wanted to. So I was like, I'll edit and I'll be the one to put music in there. Not let alone later in life, I found out the job was called music supervision. So I just kind of went there. I grew up in New York. I went to college in Boston. I worked in New York City after school, and then eventually moved out to LA because I wanted to work in TV. And I've been kind of a wanderer ever since, and all over the world. So right now I'm the head of music at Condé Nast Entertainment, where I do music for Vogue, GQ, Vanity Fair, Pitchfork, and all their other magazines. So branding is very much a part of my world all day long. So I love branding with sound.
So I'd like to dig deeper into that, because I've definitely seen you mention that you supervise the music for Condé Nast. Condé Nast. What does that mean? Because when we think Condé Nast, most people think of magazines. That's paper. Music isn't coming out of it. So
Yeah.
how did you? And you basically created the Condé Nast music division. So
Yes.
let's talk about what that actually is. What we mean when we talk about Condé Nast music.
Yeah, so the magazines all make digital content. We kind of got backdoored into it, naturally just following what our audiences liked. And so eventually the need for music came up, and it was just, I call it baby steps in my mantra. So I started out very small, just helping them with clearance and licensing. And eventually they learned all the different things that I can provide as a music supervisor, which is very creative driven. So when you go on to, we do YouTube, where you can go to like gq.com and check out their videos. I'm the one helping with all the music to all their videos. So it's sometimes fun, just YouTube content. Like one of my favorite video series we do is Wired's Google Autocomplete. I love that. It's just fun content. And then sometimes we do these very short, intricate docu-series. We do a lot of fashion, beauty content. Vogue, we just did the Met Gala. Pitchfork, we're currently re-airing footage from the Pitchfork Music Festival up in Chicago because it happened in real life this year finally. So I'm the one doing that. And so I'll do creative where I'll come up with ideas, strategize with the sound if they're not even sure what the concept should sound like. I do all the clearance, which is getting the rights holders like record labels and publishers to say yes or no. And we negotiate the terms of a license agreement. And then I do all the paperwork with the legal team at the end. So I do a full cycle of a music use all day long. So my day is all over the place and kind of at the whim to the brands and what they're looking for. But that's kind of what my day is like at the brands.
Now, it's very interesting that this is all in one specific job. And I know that you are the first person to hold this specific job because previously, I mean, I'm sure that they were making videos before they had this music supervisor position that you're in. And I would imagine that, the video creatives were handling what music to use and the legal department was handling the clearance. So, how did you carve out that niche of this needs to be a job? And also, just to back up a little, what were you doing before that they had a you on hand?
Yeah. So what my most recent job before that was at World Surf League. So that's like the NFL of surfing. Pretty much, we did all the global competition, surfing competitions, and a lot of branded content. And before that, I was at ABC Family, which was during the rebrand to Freeform. So we sonically rebranded the network to Freeform. And what does that sound like? Which was very, very fun to work on. Before that, I was at Warner Brothers Television doing all the creative for the shows in-house and working with outside music supervisors. So some of the shows there that we did in-house were The Middle, A Longmire, which is a cult classic, season 1, Fuller House, like the reboot. What else? So many. Rizzoli and Isles, which was fun for me because it's a Boston female-driven show. But yeah, a lot, so many. And pilot season, all that crazy nonsense with the streaming coming about. And I've been freelancing, so I do a lot of like branded content, commercial kind of stuff on the side. And Condé Nast kind of happened very naturally. It's one of those rare stories where somebody from my first job, I worked with them when I moved to LA. They don't work in music anymore, but they reached out to me on LinkedIn and were asking if I still do freelance, and they wanted to set up a meeting with my who became my boss, and we had a quick call. And so what Condé was doing, they just kind of had like just generic music library they were pulling from. No one was really thinking about sound. They just knew they needed it. And so they were just kind of filling it in. And then when the brands wanted to use more commercial, we call it commercial, but it's like top 40 music. Like we licensed Mariah Carey, Chris Isaac, and all these big artists. They're like, we know we need to do the rights, but the thing with the music industry is that we speak our own language. So even when lawyers do it, they're not accustomed to the normal language that we speak every day. And so these are things that you need to look out for before a song is used. Not very creative. It's very like administrative kind of conversations. But it's stuff that you get captured up front to make sure that when you actually use a song in a video and you put it out into the world, that you can do what you want with it. And that's kind of how it kind of just naturally came about. And so I started a few hours a week just helping clean up their paperwork and educating them. And as the brands they were introduced to me, the need grew and grew and grew and grew until it became like a full-time position where I officially like started a music department. But it's a department of me, I like to say. It's just me. But baby steps.
I love that. You're like an in-house solopreneur, but you also are actually a solopreneur. You have your own consultancy, Awkwardly Naked.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear how, you know what? I'll actually get to that in a minute because I'm still stuck on this one. I'd love to hear, you mentioned the paperwork and knowing the legal stuff for clearance and understanding all the terminology, being able to talk the lingo. I'd love to hear about the creative side of it too, because I'm sure it's a bit of a puzzle. There's this pie in the sky of the type of music you'd like to use.
Mm-hmm.
There's this creative challenge of the music you can use.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear how you kind of navigate the creative side, because it's got to be more than what you can use. I mean, you have a certain brand feel.
Yeah.
and creativity you need to navigate too.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that. It's a huge part of the process is because we are brands and we need to have everything we do, every aspect of a video needs to match the quality of the brand. That comes down to font, verbiage, how scenes are lit, and it also comes down to sound. So whereas someone who's just making content will just throw random music in, we have to actually very heavily pay attention to it. And so I've been helping them learn how to listen to music and how to elevate the sound with whatever kind of music we have access to, whether it's production music, indie music, commercial music. And so when they come up with a concept, before we even get into like the legal clearance kind of stuff, it's more a creative conversation where I sit them down, like the production team down to it's directors, producers, programming, maybe like an editor from the magazine itself, depending on the type of video, where it's going to air and who's handling it, which division. Company's huge. And so from there, I asked them probing questions like, what do you want this to feel like? What atmosphere are you trying to evoke? Do you want this in your face? Do you want it to fall back? Does it need to drive whatever's happening forward? And you kind of come up with an idea. I like to explain my job as being a translator. We're very much a middle person where you're speaking multiple languages. So you need to talk production. You need to be able to talk to an editor when you're talking about when you go into post, like mixing and all that, like levels, panning. And then you need to be able to talk to a musician, musical terms, because sometimes what we do is hire a composer or producer and have original music created. I love that because you get to be part of like the start to finish of creating an original piece specific to the project. And so that'll be even more intricate kind of conversations when like with music theory. Not that you need to be like a professional musician to have those conversations, but it's very important to know how to talk about music to a musician so that you can take the weird things. Like my favorite story is working on Big Bang Theory. The post supervisor was the one handling the music conversation with us. And he said to us once, this is really, really green and I need it to sound more purple. And then it's my job to say that to the composer and have the composer know exactly what I mean when it's coming to score. I did because my brain sees stuff, so I knew what that meant. But it's one of those weird conversations that you have to navigate and be able to talk that way. And so it's more about having probing questions to ask all the different parties to get to the final decision of what it sounds like.
I love all those combinations of skills and of talents and of just natural inclinations. That's the most incredible part. That you've been able to carve out this niche for yourself as an expert in something that yes, you have education in, but you also, I mean, there's a guttural instinct there for sure. Do you make music as well?
Like for fun in my room, like where no one can hear me. But in college, one of my favorite classes, I sang in a rock band. That it was called
Nice.
Rock Ensemble, and it was my favorite class we did. So every once in a while, maybe you'll hear me play here or there, but not professionally.
Yeah, but you still got to understand it's I worked many times be, as the liaison between marketers and graphic designers, and I have graphic design training, but I'm not as good as the
Right.
graphic designer. So it's good to like understand what they do, but still be
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, you're better.
Yeah. You do
So
this.
yeah.
You do that one.
So let's move to awkwardly naked. Tell us
Mhm.
about, I mean, first of all, why is it called awkwardly naked? But it also
Yes.
let's talk about what exactly you do for, well, what you do and who you do it for
Mm-hmm.
through your consultancy.
Yeah, so Awkwardly Naked, the concept of the name came to me when I was like 18 years old. It has nothing to do with naked people, by the way. It's more so around that time, music was becoming very electronic, and we were hearing less real instruments in music you hear in the radio and just all over the place, lots of like keyboard instruments. And I wanted to, assuming I was successful in my career, create a space where I'd get to work with stripped down real instruments, real people telling stories, poetic lyrics, and I'm seeing a shout out to not naked people. If you want to be naked, go for it and listen to some music. But so it was really to create a space like that, and I wanted to work with people making real content, like trying to make the world a better place, real instrumentation, and kind of strip it back. So Awkwardly Naked kind of became this like more of a construct, less what I thought it was going to be back in the day, where I just want to work with good people, make great content, tell stories, and really work with music and musicians who are creating art, what I personally would consider art. So that's what it's like. And so what I do for that, realistically, my day-to-day is really Condé Nast, but I always fall back and forth. I do a lot of consulting where I'm teaching people about music supervision, whether they want to be a music supervisor or they're working on a film or a project and they kind of just need help. They don't have the funds to hire a supervisor and they don't know what to do about it. So it'll be like over the top, here's how you handle this, or here's some advisement of what I would do or suggest. Sometimes I supervise stuff. If if it calls to my soul, it's like my projects that I get to feed my soul with. I got to do this spot with the brand called Billy, where they sell female products and they call themselves the Internet Razor. And so we got
Yes,
to like
I
create
use Billy.
yeah. Oh, you do?
I'm a
Amazing.
Billy subscriber.
Yeah, so that was a really great project. They brought me on to help really music direct, and I got to hire a producer that I've wanted to work with for a real long time to create the whole sound originally to that piece, and it was awesome. So I get to do stuff like that. It's just not as often because my day to day is Condé Nast, but yeah, this is my supervision company. I do a lot of clearance too, where it's just behind the scenes, just getting rights to songs or finding alternatives when they can't clear a song or use everyone wants to use Beyonce, but she's hard to get. She's hard to get.
That's understandable. So let's get into how you brand with sound. Now, of course, you know better than anybody that putting different music to the same video piece is going to create a completely different impression. So, how do you how did you develop and refine your sense of that, first of all, to a point where you were a recognized expert in it? And then just kind of what's your process like? Like, where do you start in terms of figuring out how the music is going to color the whole vibe of a piece? And has it changed during a project before?
Well, the last question, yes. Music is constantly changing because it's the last thing technically that happens when you shoot content. The last thing you do is fill it in with music, which is good and bad when it's an afterthought in some senses. The branding part kind of came unexpectedly. It just kind of, I didn't realize it until later in my career that I was my focus, what not focus, my specialty was branding. And I think it's because I have a PR background. Honestly, I think that's where it comes from. Is I had been a publicist on the side for like 10 years, so I think about packaging a lot. And so when you're coming up with the sound of a production, a film, a scene, even a musician, if you're but not a composer, really a artist, what's your brand? You come up with that for what you look like, what your profile look like, your whole brand strategy. It should also include what your music sounds like. So it can go on either side of it. Record labels, do you have everything, or is there a niche that you focus in? So for me, when I'm talking to something with content, I try to think about them as a whole. So what's the box? And so I start to, whether I'm working with them or maybe I'm just doing research, I kind of stalk them online too. And I just do a huge like detailed analytics of where are you? What's the imagery? And I think I feel like it's cheating for me because when I listen to music, I see stuff in my head. So when I music supervise, I kind of tend to do the opposite of that. I have the picture. So what does that sound like to me? But in my head, I'm like, what does that look like? And I kind of come up with the sound in my head. And so a lot of the times when you're working with people who don't know what the brand is or what it should sound like, I come up with ideas and I go, here's one thing, here's what you asked for. And then we meet in the middle and see what actually works. And that comes down to all the research I'm doing and then all these probing conversations I have asking questions like, who are your brand? What are your morals? What are the core values of what you're doing? That's more company based. Like, so for me at Condé Nast, it's like, what do you think of when you think of Vogue? What is that sound like? And Pitchfork, who are you working with? Like, who are the artists? Who's a Pitchfork artist? what does Pitchfork sound like? Because especially with them, they're a music magazine, so they cover a bunch of different genres, but they do have a sound. So you can quickly look at a list of artists and go, this is the Pitchfork artist, the others don't work. GQ and Wired, Bon Appetit, they all have their own kind of sound to them, and it's on purpose. And it comes with the programming, but you have to work with the people who really know at the end of the day, like what are the core values, what's the meaning and the purpose behind the brand, the company, the production, the content, the film, and go from there. Because then when you're filling in music and content, you have like the main sound. So like, for example, GQ magazine loves hip hop. So anything that they use, their general sound is going to be very hip hop driven, lots of like bass and beats to it, instrumental. But what if they're doing like a big feature piece? It's not necessarily going to be hip hop. It'll be more specific to what's happening on camera. So then you break that down into smaller little chunks of what's happening here, what should that sound like? And then on top of that, there's an extra layer when you do branded content of like, you need to match what's happening on camera, but you need to do it in a way that still sounds like GQ. And that's kind of the difference. And when I got to the point of working at World Surf League, I was doing a lot of partnerships and branded content. And that's kind of really where I realized this is actually how my brain works, is like coming up with the sound of it and figuring out how to match it together. And when you do branded content, not only are you doing it for your company, a lot of times you do co-branded stuff. So we do like GQ and a whiskey brand, Vogue and a fashion brand. And you have to match those two sounds, because the fashion brand has their sound. We have our sound. What do they sound like together? And what do they sound like together within the context of what the content's going to be about? So there's a lot of layers to it. But in the back of your mind, the way to think about it is to really always go back to, but what does that sound like under the brand, if that makes sense? I don't know if I answered all your questions.
I think so. And it kind of reminds me in a way of the Pandora algorithm, just in terms of they've done the analysis of breaking down, not just, oh, I like this song and I like this artist, but here's the elements of that music that tends to come up in the songs I give the thumbs up to, and just being able to break down on that kind of granular level. So you've of course done a lot of work with online video and things like that, as you've mentioned. You've also done other types of work. You've worked on films to some degree, right? Or television.
Both.
Yeah, and commercials. And then there's also things like the music in a store. Have you ever touched that too?
Not on purpose. The only time I really do music in a store is if our content is going to be airing in a store.
Or if there's a pop-up.
Yeah, like when they have, when you see video screens and there's like a commercial, that would be my content airing there, which we do sometimes depending on the brand and what the campaign is looking like. But in the store, it's more, they use more playlists. And they'll have like we call it, this is getting into legal stuff, but it's like a PRO license where they just have a right to air music and they have to report it. And so a lot of people use like a Spotify playlist or Pandora or something like that, where they don't have to think about it, just plays all day. But yeah, I haven't done that. That's probably more store specific, unless it's a bigger partnership with a company that wants us to do something like that. But
yeah, I remember we're going back like 20 years. When I worked at Pottery Barn after college, they do kind of themes, and when they'd have a themed collection, sometimes they'd actually sell the CD of what they're playing in the store during that particular push. And it was very interesting. I'm like, okay, that must be a whole other level of clearance.
We call that soundtracking. And so that's like when you do like a film and you buy the CD, that's a whole extra layer of getting the soundtracking rights to it. And then it's a different type of mechanical license, but it's fun when you get to do that. I try to do playlists for the stuff that I work on. So at Freeform, we would make playlists so you can listen to all the shows, music that aired. I have to admit, I haven't done it in a while because we just did the Met Gala, but for Condé Nast, I make publicly facing. You can find Condé Nast Entertainment on Spotify, and I'll make just playlists of indie artists that I'm listening to that are global driven, but still like they would fit within one of our brands too. So you can kind of get a gauge of what Condé Nast sounds like because we use so much different music. I need to do that again because it's really fun for me too, just to discover new artists. But yeah, so I think it's very important to try to do that so that you can have something to showcase. Like when I talk to new music companies or artists, and it's hard when you know in your head, like this is what Vogue sounds like, but you want to be able to say, like, not say, show them so they can listen to an example of this is what it sounds like. Because you want to make sure people are pitching you within the right context. Like somebody sending me like a R&B song for a Bon Appetit video doesn't make sense to do because Bon Appetit uses a lot of strings and orchestral kind of music and like quirky, short staccato kind of music. I don't know if that makes sense, but so sending me the wrong music for the wrong thing is like a red flag to me because it's when you go on YouTube, it's very easy to look at it and listen. So.
Well, I'd love to hear just a little. I mean, we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to encourage anyone who's watching to ask any questions they may have. But, at kind of that granular level, you mentioned how, this isn't Bon Appetit. This is GQ. How do you define that alongside the brand, the other branding, like the visual branding and the ideal audience avatar? How does that all get defined together with the music? Because I'm sure you have to defend a lot of those choices. I'm sure there are people who are like, that's what Vogue sounds like. And you're like, trust me. So how do you kind of get that done for people who don't speak that language?
I show video content, and what I have done in the past too, because sometimes like creatively behind the scenes, depending on who you work with and the company and the production, it'll really depend project to project who's the deciding factor for creative. And so a lot of what I do is convincing people that I'm right. But that's like the name of the game because they're also going to try to convince me that they're right. And so that's when I get to kind of put my editor hat back on and I will take footage and put music to it and go, this is why it works and this is why it doesn't. Because sometimes that's all it takes is seeing it to picture. And so if we've done something in the past where I'm like, this doesn't work, I will pull videos we've actually done before as a good or a bad example of what we're trying to do. And it's really about trying to have the person see the other side, but also like figure out why they like what they're doing. And what I will do is take pieces of what their idea is and find something that I think works better sonically to the brand and go from there. And it is a lot of back and forth. And sometimes, especially when there isn't a clear creative direction, it takes a lot of communication to see what works and what doesn't. And so you will have a few edits of switching the music out. And that's just natural because even when you're listening to something, it sounds just exactly what we're looking for. But when you put it to picture, it doesn't necessarily work. And so sometimes we call it a sync friendly song. You listen to music and you're like, this would be perfect for sync. Sync is like a type of license. It's an audio visual license. So you're synchronizing music to an image, music to picture. So that's a sync. But sometimes what people don't understand, not people, artists don't understand is that I'm not saying your song isn't great. It's a great song, but it actually isn't syncable because when you put it to picture, it's too distracting. Or maybe you want distracting. Maybe the music is supposed to be the forefront of what's going on. Like we just did a co-branded spot with Dior where we used, what was the song? Oh, Born to Be Alive. We used Born to Be Alive, Vogue and Dior, and we actually choreographed it. And so music was a huge part of it. And we were going back and forth for a few months about what that should sound like. So that's what it was about. And then we finally landed on Born to Be Alive, and we wanted something recognizable, something you could dance to, and something that fit the brand. And you wouldn't necessarily think Vogue and Born to Be Alive, but we actually use music like that a lot. So it's interesting, and they're a fun brand to work with because they actually love using music. So Vogue is like my music baby.
I love that. And just, before we go, final question really quickly. What are the words you would use to describe the sound of Vogue?
So Vogue, I would call them, they're not technically musical terms. I would say industrial runway music that makes you want to strut. And you have to like think about like moving your shoulders and strut. Because sometimes it means pop music and sometimes it means rock music. Like we did a video with Primal Scream. That was fun. But it's really about Vogue is more about the attitude and less about the sound itself, the genre, because we use a lot of genres. It has to encompass what you think of when you think of, like Vogue.
Yeah.
I've never licensed Vogue by Madonna, but I have licensed Madonna. But Vogue is more, they sound like attitude, strutting attitude. And I tell people, when you think of music, when you're listening to music and wanting to have it be in a Vogue video, can a model be strutting down a runway to it? Can they be showing off and dancing around in a new fashion collection? Does that work? And some people think it does, but when you put it to picture, it does not work. So
I love that. Well, I think you've given us all some food for thought here as to what our brands sound like. I think that is so huge to be able to use that additional sense to just give people even more of that feeling that the brand is already giving them, or giving the brand even more of that feeling the music is giving to them. Love that. So where can and should people find you?
So I'm not on Twitter, but I don't know if this links to my LinkedIn. I see some LinkedIn emojis. I'm
I
Jessica
can put it in
Gramuglia.
for sure.
Okay, yeah, I'm Jessica Gramuglia on LinkedIn. My Instagram is awkwardly_Jess. Jessica Gramuglia. I do answer DMs. Just don't pitch me music, please. I can't take it. I legally cannot accept unsolicited music. We'll just say that now. But I love answering questions. I love talking about this stuff. So please talk to me, especially if you're a musician trying to figure out what your own sound is. Love talking about that. And yeah, so my website's awkwardlynaked.com. If you'd like to know more about Condé Nast, you can go to condenast.com/brands. You can see all the brands we touch. And yeah, Instagram
Awesome.
is probably the best way to reach me. I do Clubhouse too. If anyone likes, on Wednesday nights, we talk about sync music, 8:00 Eastern time. My, what's my club? I think it's awkwardly_Jess too. So, but the only place I'm not is Twitter. Awkwardly Naked on Facebook. Yeah, I think I got it. I think that's everything.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on, and for allowing us to explore a topic that, there aren't as many experts on. So it was very fortuitous that,
yeah, I know, right?
that I met you.
It was great to meet you at that event. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this week. Don't forget to mark your calendars for next week, every single Friday at 12 noon. I am here on all 4 of these channels: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, talking to a guest expert about their expertise in a branding topic. Next week, I'm talking to Chris Stone about branding with Amazon. This is very untapped territory, but Chris has been building his personal brand on Amazon for a while now. And in advance of that conversation on Tuesday, you can join us on Twitter for Chat About Brand, where we'll be talking about branding with Amazon. Hope to see you there. Thank you again to all of our viewers. Please do let me know in the comments where you joined us from, and if you have joined us live or on the replay, or maybe both. You can watch us over and over. It's always here for you. And yeah, and thank you also to our Patreon members who you're about to see listed in the end credits. Thanks very much. Bye.